All right, let's talk about one of the most famous novels ever written, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, you probably know it for the witty comebacks and the epic romance, right? But what's really going on underneath all that is a super sharp look at society, money, and the huge mistake of judging a book by its cover. So let's get into it. Ah, yes, the opening line. It's probably one of the most famous in all of literature. And it's so clever, so cynical, and it perfectly sets up the marriage-crazed world we're about to enter. It sounds like a simple fact of life, but is it, really? And that's really the big question Austen wants us to ask. Because this so-called universal truth, well, it's less about romance and more about the social and economic system that basically ran women's lives. It was a truth that could absolutely lead to happiness, sure, but it could also be a trap that led to a life you never wanted. Okay, so to really get what's going on in the book, we have to understand the world Jane Austen was living in. And maybe more importantly, the world she decided not to put on the page. See, Austen kept her focus laser sharp on what she knew inside and out, this small, little bubble of the English countryside and all its class-obsessed people. Her stories are these really intimate dramas that all play out in living rooms and at fancy parties. But now, look at what was happening just outside that bubble. While Austen's characters are worried about who to dance with, the whole world is basically on fire. You've got the American and French revolutions, Britain is in a massive war with Napoleon. But here's the brilliant part. By ignoring all those huge events, she actually makes her story feel bigger. The drawing room becomes this high-stakes battlefield, and her critique of society feels that much more intense. And that's because, for her characters, the real battle was being fought over marriage proposals. The conflict wasn't about politics or war, it was all about cold, hard economic survival. For women like the 5 Bennet sisters, this was no joke. They couldn't inherit their dad's property, and they couldn't really go out and get a job. So marriage wasn't just a nice idea, it was their only career path. It was everything. I mean, listen to how Austen herself puts it. She calls marriage a preservative from want. It's like a shield, protecting women from being poor. Finding love was great, a real bonus, but finding financial security, that was the actual goal. And just look at the numbers to see how high the stakes really were. If Elizabeth Bennet never got married, she'd be living on about £40 a year, which is not a lot. Mr. Darcy, on the other hand, had an income of £10,000 a year. That is 250 times more. So when you realize that, her rejecting his proposal wasn't just turning down a guy she didn't like. It was a massive, almost unthinkable financial gamble. And that brings us right to the heart of the whole thing. The two characters who give the novel its title and the personality flaws that first push them apart and then, somehow, pull them together. So on one side, you've got Mr. Darcy. His fatal flaw is pride. He's an aristocrat, and he kind of looks down on anyone he thinks is beneath him, which makes him come off as a total snob. And on the other side, you've got Elizabeth Bennet. Her problem is prejudice. She's so sure that she can size people up in an instant that her first impressions become rock-solid facts in her mind. And here's something really interesting. Austen's original title for the book was just First Impressions. And that tells you everything you need to know, right? The whole story is basically a giant warning sign about trusting your gut feelings, showing how Elizabeth's immediate dislike of Darcy and her immediate trust in the charming Mr. Wickham are both completely wrong. And misquote right here, this is the spark that lights the whole fire. It's Elizabeth's spirit. She absolutely refuses to be pushed around by Darcy's money or his social status. And that stubbornness is what causes all the conflict. But ironically, it's also the very thing that makes Darcy fall for her. You know, the brilliant thing about their story is that they don't have to completely change who they are. Darcy is still going to be proud, and Elizabeth is still going to be sharp and witty. Their journey is all about making what the book calls minor adjustments. Just learning to see past their own issues so they can finally see each other for who they really are. So here we are over 200 years later. Why are we still obsessed with this story? Why does this book about manners and marriage still feel so important to us today? Well, I think it's because it taps into things that are just human. I mean, who hasn't totally bombed a first impression or been misjudged by someone else? We all know what social pressure feels like. The story is a huge celebration of knowing your own worth, just like Elizabeth does. And maybe most importantly,
It reminds us that real, lasting love often comes from the hard work of understanding someone, not just from instant chemistry. And this is what you get for all that work. When Elizabeth says this at the end, it's not just because she got the guy. It's this moment of pure triumph. It's the finish line of a journey where she had to admit she was wrong, figure herself out, and find a partner who loves her for exactly who she is. A story that started with a pretty cynical take on marriage and money ends with one of the most honest declarations of happiness you'll ever read. It's just a powerful transformation, and it's been hooking readers ever since 1813. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. The lesson of the book goes way beyond Old English ballrooms. It really forces you to ask yourself, who have I been totally wrong about based on a first impression? Who might I see in a completely new light if I was just willing to make one of those minor adjustments?